Hey everyone, welcome to the day 4 of our Salesforce Marketing Cloud Administrator Bootcamp. Thank you for joining us today, and we appreciate your interest and your passion to upskill. I am Jyotsna Bitra, and I lead the Salesforce Marketers Group in Phoenix. I am joined by Naji and a wonderful Jackie. This bootcamp is intended for anyone who wants to learn the ins and outs of the Marketing Cloud and also prepare for the Marketing Cloud certification. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This session is being recorded and an email will be sent out 24 hours after each session with the link to the presentation and the recording. If you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to post your questions in the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. We will try to answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. If you have any unanswered question, please reach out to us on our Slack channel. All our speakers are active on the Slack channel and they have been answering all our questions there. The homework will be posted in the Slack channel and you can find it with the hashtag homework, and all the other resources will be shared on the resources Slack channel. Please post your feedback and your comments on Twitter using the hashtag MCAdmin0to-hero and @PHXB2C user group, UG. Just a little recap of what we have discussed so far. On the day 2, we have covered about the Marketing Cloud products. Some of the products that were discussed are the Social Studio, Advertising Studio, Mobile Studio, Audience Studio, Web Studio, and Interaction Studio. You can find a recording of that session over here. When we share the presentation, you will be able to access it. And on the day 3, Shibu has discussed about the subscriber data management, and he has covered the concepts about the contact model, the data extensions, the attribute groups, and how to delete the contacts, the profile center, and the preference centers. And today we are going to move on to the setup topic. So this section takes about 38% of the overall weightage, and you can expect around 22 questions on this topic. So we have divided this section into 3 parts. So today, Jackie is going to discuss a few of the setup features, which includes users, roles and permissions, business units, FTP accounts, and file locations. On the day 5, we have Manish discussing about the setup overview and how do we set up the accounts, security settings, feature settings, install packages, and many more. On the day 6, we have Elliot Harper, and he's going to discuss all about the Marketing Cloud extension products. That is the Einstein, Datarama, Google Analytics, Distributed Marketing, and Web Analytics. Now, without further ado, let's move on to Jackie. Jackie, I am going to change the presenter to be you. Take it over, Jackie.
Thank you. And okay, everyone, here we go. There's no turning back for me right now. So I am going to share my screen. Hopefully you can see this.
We can see.
Okay, I just wanted to start off with a little review on who's talking tonight. My name is Jackie Meny, and I'm a senior consultant at Horizontal Digital, located in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I have 6 Salesforce certifications so far, and I am a member of the 2020 Salesforce Marketing Champion class. I have 3 dogs who you may or may not hear barking in the background. So they're just being friendly and saying hi. And with that, I'm just going to jump right into Marketing Cloud. So the objective for me today is to do this almost entirely as a live demo. And if this could go terribly wrong, but I'm pretty sure it won't. So let's just start off on your setup homepage. For the Marketing Cloud Administrator exam test, you will get a lot of questions, even about this page, and you should be super familiar with what you can do on here and what you can't do. For example, it's really important to know that you get an overview on this page of how many users you have, data extensions, and content, how many assets you have. This is really important that you are very confident in knowing the nuances between what you can see here and what you cannot see here. So sometimes they'll throw you off and they'll say you can view a bounce report on this page. Things like that. It's important to know the differences of each thing and really spend some time clicking in each of these areas, understanding what the setup checklist offers, what it doesn't offer, and then being familiar with just even some of these options up here, like the links to Trailhead or release notes, and then how you would go about creating a ticket and accessing help and training resources. So I know we've got a big group on here, and some of you have not ever logged into Marketing Cloud before, and that's great. Some of you might have access to Marketing Cloud, some of you might not. So for those of you that do have access to Marketing Cloud, definitely take some time to actually click through all of these items and take notes on what the options are. And if you don't have access to Marketing Cloud, this is a demo-ish environment. It's the trainers that are part of this program have access. There's generally not a training environment that's publicly available, but go ahead and feel free to take a screenshot of this so that you can have a visual reference of what this page looks like, because I know that that's sometimes hard to find in some of the documentation, or it's difficult to remember how to click these. So just leave that up for a second. If there's questions or any of the hosts want to have this, they want to jump in with anything, feel free to do so. So
there are currently no questions at this moment.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for a sign of life. I feel better about that. I'm like, am I talking to you all here?
You're doing great.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to jump into is creating a user. You would do that by going to the left-hand side on the administration menu. You're going to expand the user section and then click into users. So this is where you can view all of your users. You can switch the view and only view your active users or your inactive users. This is also where you'd go to assign a role to a user or a business unit. If you're going to create a new user, there's not a lot of stuff you have to fill in, which is good. It's pretty quick to create a user. The big thing I want to call out here, and especially for folks in the central time zone like myself, there is a nuance between this central time zone with the star and this one without the star that does not observe daylight savings. So if you are affected by this or you have users in central time, make sure that you're consistently using one or the other, and then align that if your company settings and your company is based in central time zone, make sure that the company settings match whatever your users have in that specific instance. You don't have to, but it just can create some unexpected difficulties if you are scheduling an email or you're trying to start a journey and you expect it to go in 1 hour, and then sometimes it can get thrown off an hour earlier, an hour later. So just observing the difference between these two and keeping an eye on it. It's one of those little things that you don't know it even matters until your email didn't go out at 4 p.m. and it went out at 5 p.m. and you're in trouble. You're going to need to set a temporary password. Typically, a best practice would be the temporary password, make it something like change me 123, and then the user will change it immediately. They're forced to. So that would be one recommendation I have when you're creating a user. After you hit save, you will return to this screen, and then you'll need to assign your user to a business unit and a role in most situations. And keep in mind that what I'm showing you and what I'm talking about right now, this is in relation to Enterprise 2.0. There are differences if you are not in an Enterprise 2.0 account, but most people I know are using Enterprise 2.0, and the test is going to focus on Enterprise 2.0. So if you, for some reason, are in Marketing Cloud and it doesn't look like this, or you've done it differently before, you might be in Enterprise 1.0, so it's just good to know. Anyway, what you do is you would check the box next to the user that you want to modify, and then you would click Manage Roles. This person has Marketing Cloud Viewer. So what I want to do is I want to change the roles that they have assigned, and I'm going to click Edit Roles. The thing here that I have helped so many new users with and new admins, because they think, oh, I'm the admin, so I need to go and assign all of the roles to myself because I need to have the most permissions. If there's 3 things that I want anyone to remember about this presentation tonight, this is one of them, the first one. Less is more when it comes to assigning roles, because the way the roles are set up is if you have a Marketing Cloud Viewer role, which is a limited role, and you also have Marketing Cloud Administrator, you will end up with the least permissions between the 2 of those combined. So if admin has the permission to edit data and Marketing Cloud Viewer has only permission to view data, their end result will be that this user cannot edit the data, they can only view it. So this is really, really tough for folks that are used to using the Sales Cloud side. If you come from that side of the world and you're new to Marketing Cloud, we're used to permission sets on that side, where permission sets can only add to the amount of access that you have. Where in Marketing Cloud, it's actually the opposite. What you'll run into is that these roles, when you start combining them, they can end up negating each other. So be very careful is my number 1 takeaway tonight. Do not, especially not yourself or any of your other admins, do not just check all of these boxes, because it will end up locking them out of certain features and they won't even be able to go undo it themselves. And you'll have to do it for them. So less is more here. The other thing you can do is you go back to your user list and you can decide which business units that your user has access to. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to check the box next to the user. I'm going to click Manage Business Units. We're going to go into business units a little bit more, but as you can see, you could have a hierarchy of business units, and you can set a default one for that user, and then you can also choose whether or not you want to include additional business unit access for this person. So that's how you'd assign permissions, generally speaking. You're going to need a business unit and you're going to need at least 1 role. Any questions on that?
I'll just ask one, but I'll most likely try to save most of the questions till the end. So one of our questions that we have is, which one do we do first? Do we create the user first, or do we identify the roles before creating the user?
That's a really good question. So my answer to that would be, in theory, and as you plan out who you're creating the new user for, you would want to think about and have an understanding of who that person is and what it is they need to be able to do. So once you understand that, then you'll be able to record what roles and permissions you are planning to give to them. But the first thing you have to do is you have to first create the user, which is just this quick little page that of course is not going to load quickly because I want it to. You would create this user, and then once they're saved, you could go back and assign them the role and assign them a business unit. Now, the other thing that you can do, and that you will get asked about this on the test, is you can also assign a role to an entire business unit. So that could save you some time when you're setting up users, because that was two separate steps where I went in, I created the user, and then I did two things. At first, I assigned this user some roles, and then I got back to this screen, and then I clicked Manage Business Units, and I assigned them to certain business units. So if you assign a role to a business unit, then you wouldn't have to do necessarily that step for managing roles. I say that with a big caveat, because that sounds like a really cool plan. In reality, in my experience, that is usually a disaster. There's definitely some use cases where I would add a role to a business unit, but don't get too liberal with that, because you will end up running into a host of problems that mostly relate back to when I was talking about the conflict when you assign multiple roles to a user and they negate each other. The same thing can happen. So let's say you have this business unit that I want to set a default role to. So I went into business units and I'm going to check the box manage roles. If you assign this Marketing Cloud viewer role to the entire business unit, that means even if your admin works in that business unit, your admin will lose their own admin permissions. So I'll say that again. When you assign a role to a business unit, be mindful that the role that the business unit has will override whatever individual permissions the user themselves has when they're working in that business unit. So if you wanted to go assign the role Marketing Cloud Administrator to the entire business unit, you won't run into that problem because that's one of the highest levels of permissions you can have. But you could also end up unintentionally granting access to a user that normally has a viewer profile, or excuse me, a viewer role. But the second they worked in that business unit, all of a sudden they were an admin. And so you don't want to expose yourself to that kind of risk if you're dealing with users that aren't trained or might accidentally make a setting change that was unintended. So that's kind of the difference between assigning a role to a business unit itself and assigning it to a user individually. So this on one hand, assigning it to a business unit could save you a lot of time with user setup, but there's some drawbacks, like I said, because it could end up negating or enhancing permissions unintentionally that one of your users has. So let's go talk about roles. This is even my favorite people in the world. This is like one of the top things they complain about. And even Gilda said, oh, I do not like this topic of Marketing Cloud roles because I wish it was a little bit different. And sometimes I'm a little offended by that because this is like one of my favorite topics. And it makes me sad that most people do not like dealing with Marketing Cloud roles. So I hope to change that tonight. something that you'll need to know for day-to-day, as well as on the test, is there's default roles that come with Marketing Cloud, and then you can also create custom roles. There's two kinds of default roles that already come in Marketing Cloud. And if you use the system now and you've always wondered, I know there's default roles and I can tell which ones are the default ones because they have this system admin external key. You might be wondering, why is there an administrator and also a Marketing Cloud administrator? And what is the difference? Do I need both of them? There's basically two sets of Marketing Cloud roles. There's legacy roles. They're essentially legacy roles that were carried over from the exact target days. You can recognize which ones are the legacy roles because they do not say Marketing Cloud in front of them. So a legacy role would be analyst, content creator, data manager, distributed sending user, and administrator. These are essentially email these are all roles that would relate to email. The other system default roles, the newer ones, they all start with Marketing Cloud. And those are comprehensive of the other areas in Marketing Cloud, like Mobile Studio and Cloud Pages. So think of it like that. If you kind of want to know a quick general difference between the two kinds of default roles, the older legacy roles are generally only related to email functionality. The Marketing Cloud roles are focused more on the other studios, the newer features, but beyond email. So that's actually why you end up having, for the true like super admin set of roles, would be administrator plus Marketing Cloud administrator. That would be the top combo of access, and that's typically just what most organizations end up using because it's the easiest way to manage this. But I will say, for those of you who come from the CRM side of things, you know that it is not a good plan to give all of your users administrator access, because you never want to do that. You cannot have that many administrators. It's a bad plan. But most people that use Marketing Cloud have all administrator users. They don't even use the other roles. So we know we shouldn't do that, but most people that find that these roles, like they're too complicated or they never suit your business needs. So you end up just assigning. That's what most people do. So we all know we shouldn't, but pretty much everyone does, because people have found that it's really, really hard to figure out what other roles to give to people. So your homework tonight is to read this blog post I wrote, where I actually went through and explained every single role and kind of the big differences of what they can and cannot do. So I would go through it. I wrote it in really, really simple terms that I don't think are as easily understood the way the Marketing Cloud documentation explained it. So take a look at that, become familiar with it. And I even gave ideas on when you should combine a role or how to combine roles in real life to make them effective so that you can avoid giving everybody administrator access. Okay, so we're about halfway through, so I'm gonna do a little time check. And I think that covers the default roles. You can create a custom role by clicking create. I would say on the day-to-day, I would very heavily discourage you from creating a lot of custom roles. There's a couple of reasons for that. It's really hard to manage them. The definitions of these roles change almost every release, not in a large way, but the back end of Marketing Cloud is being slowly updated every release. And so a lot of these things that you see here, some of these are just legacy exact target roles that those features don't even exist anymore. I think a couple of examples of ones you see here is, I think Express, that's one of the ones, like, that's not even a thing anymore. And I don't think Adobe Analytics, I think that one got sunset too. So if you're creating roles that are custom, it's really important that you're keeping up with changes and making sure that if there's a new feature that was added, it's not going to automatically get included in your role. So you can create a custom role. It's very simple, but it takes a lot of time. And again, it's hard to manage it, and it can get really complicated and difficult to use if you create too many. So that covers roles. Is there a fun question that, or anything anyone wanted me to ask, or do we mostly have a lot of questions that we can get to?
Right now, with most of the people asked the one question, which was, what's the difference between the MC admin versus the administrative role? And you just answered that. So that like nixed a lot of questions for people. If you're looking for just one simple question, one of them is there a role for reporting, or would that need to be a custom role?
That's a good question. For reporting, this is probably one of my favorite things I figured out when I was doing all of the research for my blog post recently. You would think, like, Marketing Cloud view only, that in my head would make sense, right? Like, oh, this person can look at everything, they just can't change it. So to me, that's pretty close to a reporting user. Well, fun fact, if you assigned this to somebody and you just wanted them to go do reports, what will happen is they can go to reports, they can view the reports that are in the report library, but if they click on a report and try to click run report, they can't, because fundamentally speaking, a view only report or view only access model would allow you to view, not do an action like run. So for a reporting user, do not give them this role, because even if you have, like I said, if you gave them, 2 other roles and you had this box checked for Marketing Cloud Viewer, they would lose their permission to run the report. They would only be able to view the list of reports. That doesn't allow you to view the data inside of any report, because you actually have to physically run the report to get there. So that's like my biggest whoops for a reporting user. I would recommend either modifying slightly. Now, that's one thing I didn't mention before. Some of the system default roles you can edit. Some of them you are never allowed to edit. The way to remember that is those newer roles that I talked about, the ones that all start with Marketing Cloud. If it starts with Marketing Cloud, you cannot edit this role. You cannot customize it. You can't make any changes to it. It is what it is. So if it starts with Marketing Cloud, you cannot edit it. But you can edit the legacy roles. Again, I don't totally recommend doing that because that's going to be impossible to remember. Is that a custom thing I changed? Whatever. But in the one, if there's one time I would do it, I would go into the analyst role, because the analyst role generally has most reporting capabilities. But if I expand it, then I will see that there's a couple of areas. This is so long, I'd have to do control find, but there's like 5 different rows that all have to do with running a report. And there's some of them are older feature and they're newer features and they didn't come in this set. So for a reporting user, I would probably slightly modify. I think that's the fastest, easiest way to do this, would be my gut. But I actually talked about that in this blog post. So I think that link is already in the chat, but if not, it's going to be included in the recap link. So you can read into I went through like even what checkboxes to change if you wanted to do that method for a reporting user.
Great answer, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so the next thing is business units. And I kind of touched on business units before when I was talking about assigning a role to a business unit. And there's really like no good order to talk about which, it's like the chicken or the egg, which do I talk about first? So we're going to backtrack a little. I mentioned business units before. What you want to know for the exam is understanding how and why you would use a business unit. At the top level, the most, I would say the biggest thing so item number 2 to walk away in terms of test prep for this from this session, item number 2 is generally if you need to restrict users from certain data, subscriber data or content assets, if you need to restrict users, that's usually one of the first reasons that you would have another business unit. It's important to know that business units have a price tag. The price tag obviously varies what companies pay because of their contracts and all sorts of stuff that I don't even know the nuances of, but understanding that there is a cost to a business unit. And that's important because you usually don't want to just go create 100 business units because typically that's super, super expensive. So most people, they try to limit the number of business units because you don't want to have too many, just because it's not even cost effective would be the first reason. The second typical reason that you need to create a new business unit has to do with SAP configuration, which is your sender authentication package. And if you, let's say everyone knows that Gap owns Old Navy and they own Athleta and they own Banana Republic. Gap would be an example of a parent business unit. And we want Old Navy as a child business unit because when they send emails and they send links to things and when they send their preferences unsubscribe page, it needs to look like it's from Old Navy and it can't say Gap on it because people would be confused. They'd be like, I thought I signed up for emails from Old Navy. Why am I getting emails from Gap? Okay, so if you need to separately brand your business unit, that's usually going to trigger a need for a second business unit because you can only have SAP configured one per business unit. And SAP is what would control that unique branded experience. and so on. So I'd say those are the two biggest things on the test that are important to know, because you'll sometimes need to know when it's time to create a business unit. Should a business unit be a parent or a child? How does the hierarchy work? And then why, when is the right time? So I said most likely the most important answers or things to note about what would trigger the need for a business unit. It would usually relate either to the need to uniquely brand and have an SAP configuration, or number two would be to limit access to subscriber data and other things like in Content Builder, because you cannot hide certain folders inside of a business unit. So if your whole company has one business unit, you can't selectively share subscriber data folders or content. Everybody in the business unit can see the same data, and you can't fix that with a user permission. So if you wanted to create a business unit, you would go to the business unit section, you would click create, and you would select its name. You can leave external key blank for most situations. Time zone, again, I mentioned, just keep an eye on, for the most part, I think this mainly only impacts central time zone, but keep an eye on the difference between the daylight savings versus no daylight savings. It might haunt you later. And then you'd want to define your date format. And then you want to select where it should fall within the hierarchy of the organization. There's a lot of different ways you can set up your hierarchy. Some companies have a hierarchy based on like a brand, like I mentioned before. Some companies have a hierarchy that is defined by like region. So maybe like a US business unit and an Asia business unit, and then maybe you have a Canadian business unit. You know, a lot of times the region would be a different way to structure it that is really important. So there's a lot of different ways you can structure the hierarchy, and that's really a process that you would want to map out, you know, at a broader level with your business, and think about how that relates to the company and the structure overall of the company. That's usually a good place to start when you're trying to figure out how to set up your business units. So then you would just fill out the business unit level is really more of a default when we're talking about email display name and email reply address, because you can still manage that per send within the business unit. You can have multiple display names or multiple reply address information. So you're just right now setting like the business unit default for what would appear if you weren't to change it at the time of send and have different sender profiles. Same thing with the physical address. I mean, that is going to affect the tag, what address physically shows up in the bottom of your email. But you can also inherit it from the parent business unit. And then you'll need to figure out if you want your subscribers to be unsubscribed from the entire marketing cloud or just from that business unit. So think back to my example with, you know, Gap and Old Navy and Banana Republic. Somebody could say, I want to unsubscribe from Old Navy, but I still want those emails from Banana Republic. So that's when you would want to use the unsubscribe from business unit only. But somebody else could say, I don't just like this whole organization, they're bugging me with their emails. I don't want an email from Old Navy, and that means I don't want emails from Gap or Banana Republic. I don't want any emails from any of you anymore. That's when you would want to leverage this unsubscribe from all business units in the enterprise. It's more of a global opt-out. That means no matter what business unit you're in, this person is just off the list, versus the business unit only. That would help, in some cases, protect the subscriber list from going too low unintentionally. But at the same time, there's a lot of reasons why you might want to set it at the enterprise level. You know, one thing would be really to give the user a good experience. Like if they think they're globally opting out, but they didn't know that they were in a certain business unit and opting out just from the business unit. Because sometimes that's hard for people to take, and they think that you're abusing their inbox and really you're not. They just didn't understand the difference. So depends on what you're trying to accomplish for the most part with the unsubscribe settings. So after you save your business unit, and this is the last thing I'm going to cover in this area, and then I'll open it up and we can go through some of those questions. Sorry, so thought I was on mute. When you go back to your business unit after you've created it, you would also want to, I'm locked out of it in here, but you would want to define your subscriber filters after you create the business unit. That can help control what subscribers that business unit has access to. So remember, before I said that if you have a business unit, you would maybe, a good reason to create a business unit would be because you wanted to control what subscriber info each group had. So defining a subscriber filter is how you accomplish that. So if you create a new business unit and you define a subscriber filter that says this business unit can only see customers in Canada, you would define that subscriber filter so that you were protecting the list from a different country that you didn't want that group to have access to. So that's kind of what that means and translates to in terms of the need to protect that data. Okay, with that, we've got like 15 minutes left. What questions do we have?
Great job. That was wonderful, and we appreciate that. So I'm just going to ask just a few questions here. One person has asked, could you please give a demo of permissions?
So I think someone might be asking that permissions is sort of how its access is referred to in the enterprise version and not the enterprise 2.0. Your roles are basically a grouping of permissions. So the enterprise version of Marketing Cloud, they don't have roles. Roles are basically a way to batch a bunch of permissions individually. So when you hear the word permissions in Marketing Cloud, most likely you're talking about this area where it's the really, really granular permissions. Again, so a role is basically a grouping of permissions. So perhaps the question really wanted me to go back to the area where I expanded the permissions.
Mm-hmm.
There's quite a hierarchy in here, and again, this is why I think a lot of people don't like this topic, because there's stuff hidden everywhere in here, like the administration. There's items within roles or your users and what your users can do. But then there's also different areas other places that will reference roles as well. So they're very, very hard to follow, and you have to spend a lot of time like digging in and to these little subfolders, and then sometimes it's really not that obvious what the permission is because it's so buried under so many levels. And as I mentioned before, certain features like interactive email, you wouldn't think this, but this person, if they're trying to create interactive emails, they would also need permissions within cloud pages. So, you know, it's sometimes hard to follow because in your head you're thinking, yeah, this user has all of the permissions within email, like that should cover it. But then there's lots of little areas that interact with each other. So again, I swear I'm not trying to like pump my own writing here because I get nothing out of this, but I actually talked and called out in this post some of the most impactful granular level permissions and what to keep an eye out for and which things you can kind of ignore. So hopefully that covers it.
Thank you. So what does it mean if either neither allow or deny is checked? Does that mean the permissions is automatically denied?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad somebody asked that. If I could give out prizes right now, I would. But you'll just have to pat yourself on the back. If you leave this blank, so you have not allowed, but you haven't denied it, this mainly comes into play when we're talking about combining roles. So if somebody has one role assigned to them, let's use this administrator. Let's say you only gave somebody this administrator role and you didn't also give them the marketing cloud administrator role. So we've got areas like, let's say, social engage, where it's neither allowed nor denied. Well, if this user, even though their name says admin, if I didn't explicitly give access to something in the role, that by default, they will not have access to it. So what we're looking at here is that if my user only had just one role assigned and it was administrator, since they have not allowed nor denied social engage, this person would not have access to it because anything you have access to, it needs to be explicitly granted. Now you might be wondering, why would I ever use deny at all? If I know that like sometimes when I have deny checked, it ends up negating the property. What the difference would be is, let's say this person didn't have the allowed granted, but they also didn't have deny. If it's blank and they are getting assigned a second role that allows them to use a certain feature, they will then be allowed to have it. However, if deny is checked and then they have a second role where allow is checked, the result would be that this person does not have access anymore. Even though the allow is checked, if they have a second role that added on a deny anywhere, the deny takes priority. So if you have no boxes checked on your page, that would not give you access to something. You would need to have the secondary permission authorizing you to have it.
Great question. Great answer. How could you please explain the SAP SSL setup process that is required for a business unit?
Oh my gosh, I would love to, but that's like a 15-minute conversation. And the SAP process is think of SAP where it says sender authentication package. It's a package, which means it's a bundle of things. And it's sort of like, you know, if you buy things individually, they're more expensive. And then you go to Costco and you buy like a set of a bunch of things, you usually save some money. SAP is a bunch of different products that you can buy individually, but bundled together, they create a whole package because typically people need all of the things in the package. So SAP is, I like to think of SAP as like a white glove service because you could pay less money and manually do some of that setup and end up potentially with a similar result. But it's probably going to cost you, and it's probably a better idea to just buy the sender authentication package and get that service from Salesforce in addition to the other products it provides. So that one, I think the help documentation is actually really straightforward. So I would just do a Google search for Marketing Cloud Sender Authentication Package, and it's not that simple to read. I don't think I can do a full explanation right now.
Well, that's a great way of answering, and definitely feel free to look that up and on Google and see if you can get more details on SAP and SSL. Is it correct that the subscriber filter for a business unit is based on profile attribute settings?
For the most part, yes.
Great. Is there which one, do you know which one of these permissions and roles are maybe like mostly asked on the test? As there are so many, maybe they can probably not have to study so many of the roles and permissions, or maybe not have to memorize so many if there's a set list of roles that they need to study for the exam.
That's a good question. The exam changes constantly. So even, you know, when I took the exam and passed it versus someone who took it 2 weeks later, everyone's questions are going to vary. So I can't say, even if I could remember like what specific question I had on this topic, I think it would, you're not allowed to share, well, you know, what questions you had on an exam, but I would say just because I had that question, it by no means means anyone else would. So typically speaking, I think the way you can prepare best for it is just have that high level understanding of like, what's the general difference between these roles, and like, how do I know which roles are more email focused, or which roles would really relate back to other studios like mobile studio. So I would say that the higher level basic understanding where I went through those just like key differences, and like I said, if you want basically a summary of some of the things I talked about, I did break it down into like, what are the couple most important things that you need to know about this one. So I would say don't look at it as like trying to memorize 8 different default roles and the nuances between them. You want to remember the high level differences, like, hey, I know that if the role starts with Marketing Cloud, that's one of those newer roles that's really giving you permissions on stuff like Cloud Pages and Mobile Studio, versus if it doesn't start with Marketing Cloud, you know that's one of those legacy roles. You know that you can edit those roles, and you know that those are generally going to cover the original core features of ExactTarget only related to email. So there's your email legacy roles. Again, you can edit those. And then the other thing is knowing how to spot those other 4 or other 5 Marketing Cloud roles, and know that you cannot edit those, and those are going to cover those newer features.
Great answer. I'll go with just the last 2. Besides brand, what other scenarios would you need to build? What would you have for creating a business unit?
Again, branding would be the need to brand, and you might need SAP for that business unit, and you can only have one SAP per business unit. That's one. And then the second one is being able to filter the subscriber data and manage sharing. If there's things that you don't want to share with other users, you cannot control that again with the roles. You have to control that with a business unit because you cannot hide things within a business unit.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. And our last question is about single sign-on. Does Marketing Cloud support single sign-on? And is there a just-in-time user provisioning where we can just assign users a specific role?
The answer is yes, Marketing Cloud does support SSO, and I'm implementing for a client right now. And I expected it to be way, way worse than it is in reality. It's actually not that bad, and it's very doable for single sign-on. And that's another one where if you Google Marketing Cloud single sign-on, that page is really, really helpful and clear and explains exactly how to go about that. To answer the question about how to assign the roles or assign just-in-time user creation, with any Salesforce product, I always say with enough time and money, you can do anything. So there's absolutely some really cool APIs you can create, or where you're getting really fancy with some behind the scenes developer stuff. You can set it up to automatically assign users. I would say that's probably something I would do with a big company and lots of users to manage. Otherwise, the cost of the amount of effort you have to spend getting all the triggers and behind the scenes stuff developed, it's probably not worth it if you don't have that many users.
Thank you. That was the last of the questions tonight. If you have more questions for Jackie, please feel free to check the link that I just posted and join our Slack. This is where all of our speakers will be there to help and answer any questions that you may have. This is also where you will find extremely useful resources that will help you to pass your certification and also help you to answer any of the questions that you may have tonight. So great job, Jackie. That was wonderful. And now I'm going to let you all know about some homework that we have going on. So we have day 4 assignments. And these assignments are posted on the Slack channel in the homework channel. You will be able to see everything there. And if you need help or assistance, again, feel free to just ask your questions, and our contributors and speakers will be there to help and assist you. Lastly, the final announcement that I will have before I turn it back over to JB is there will be a poll going out tonight to everyone on the Slack channel. Please look out for this, as I want to get your opinions on how you would feel if, about a voluntary study session on Saturday, September 12th. During this study session, we will just go over trailheads and walk through the trailheads together. This is an opportune moment to take an hour out of your schedule and walk through these trailheads if you haven't had the chance to. Please let me know if you feel like this would be very valuable to you, and if it is, sign this poll and I will be able to take a look at it, and we will determine if we will be conducting the study session on Saturday or not. Thank you. JB, I'm going to turn it back over to you now.
Sure. Thanks, Naji. And that was a wonderful session by Jackie. And thank you, Jackie, for all those insights. And everything that Jackie shared today is really very important towards the exam. As a Marketing Cloud administrator, you're expected to know the ins and outs of the Marketing Cloud administration, and also how to set up the users, the roles and permissions, and the business units, how you assign them, how you set up the permissions is very important. And especially if you are already a Salesforce administrator or a Salesforce user, the way the permissions work in Salesforce is totally different from the way it works in the Marketing Cloud. In Salesforce, the most permissive settings win, and in Marketing Cloud, the most restrictive permissions win. This is something to keep in mind, and you can expect a couple of questions on the roles and permissions. So this session by Jackie is very insightful. And on the day 3, as we talked about the technical marketers meeting and the SFMC lookup answers, Jackie has a session on roles and permissions on one of our SFMC lookup answers. I will share that link as well in the chat here, and in the presentation also I will make sure to add it. So you can go back to that recording and access that. And moving on to next thing, what are you grateful for today? I am grateful for the customer success events. These events are conducted by the Salesforce experts, product experts, and there are a variety of events, including the Circle of Success, webinars, Ask an Expert, and these have different categories that talks about the insights, getting started. If you can see my screen, so this is a list of all the sessions that are happening in the Marketing Cloud. You can select the product here and also the category of these events. And some of the events are recorded and you can access them here. And if you want to go for the events in your particular region, you can select it here and also can choose the time zone and the language as well. We have a variety of events in here. The one Marketing Cloud Bootcamp is the one that we are currently on. And the next one is Ask a Marketing Cloud Expert. This is something that you can directly talk to a Marketing Cloud expert. I believe this happens every Monday and Friday during the American time zone. But if you are on the different region, it may be in different timings. And there are some sessions that are really helpful for different levels. So if you're getting started, or if you want to know how a particular feature is configured, or if you want to get more insights, you can find all of the sessions here. And here's a list of all of our upcoming sessions. So next, on 8th of September, Manish is going to talk about the next part of the setup, that is the set of features, the accounts, brand builder, and few other things. And the next Thursday, we have Elliot talking about the Marketing Cloud extension products. And that will wrap up the event. And thank you very much for joining us today. And we'll see you in the next week with our next topic.